How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we continue our series at looking at the offseason for each CFL team, this time taking a look at the Montreal Alouettes. And to say it's been an eventful offseason in Montreal would be an understatement. Just so many key pieces moving around this organization, not just on the field, but from an ownership perspective. They were sold to Pierre-Carl Pelado, who is the owner of Quebecor, which is a multi-million-dollar media company in Quebec. And it's nice to see the team with some solid financial backing after a period of uncertainty this offseason where it didn't look like the previous owners were committed. It looked like a sale was inevitable, but it didn't look like it was going to happen in time for free agency. And I think it happened just a little bit after free agency, about a month later. They were still able to make some moves in the meantime, but just having that perception dark cloud over the franchise didn't help to start off free agency and help them convince a key free agent to come here. But nevertheless, they do bring in some key players, and let's talk about them. But first, I want to highlight a few of their re-signings, starting with linebacker / defensive back Tyrese Beverett. I think he was a guy that was all over the place, a real nuisance to play against when my team, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, went up against the Alouettes last season. I thought that was a good re-signing for them. They also bring back running back Walter Fletcher. This one surprised me because they already have another American running back, obviously, in William Stanback on the roster, but they were using both of these backs at the end of last season, and it seems like running the ball is going to be a big part of their game plan again this season. So I guess from that perspective, it made sense to bring back Fletcher, even though from a ratio perspective, it's going to be interesting to see how it works out for them. You don't usually see teams carry more than one American running back on the roster. They also bring back defensive back Wesley Sutton. I think this guy is very similar to what I said about Beverett, just a playmaking guy. I think Sutton was even better last year than Beverett was, and I think he was one of the best players on this Alouettes defense last year. Just a Swiss Army knife guy that you could put on the blitz. I mean, he had some bad games last year. I think there was the one game where he took a bunch of penalties, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was the guy that took a bunch of penalties in that game against Edmonton last year. But I think overall, that Sutton had a really good year last year with Montreal, and I'm excited to see what he does again next year. And then finally, a very essential re-signing here, wide receiver Reggie White comes back. He's going to be expected to play an even bigger role in this offense. Already thought he was their second best receiver last year on the team, but may be asked to play even the number one role this coming season. And I think he's an ascending player that is good for the Alouettes to bring back. Now with the re-signings out of the way, let's turn our attention to the whiteboard, starting with their additions. Starting most importantly with quarterback Cody Fajardo that they bring in from the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Obviously, with a major loss we'll talk about in a minute happening this free agency, they had a gaping hole at the quarterback position, and Cody Fajardo was really the only guy with starting caliber experience, unless they wanted to go the Dane Evans trade route that was available this offseason. So it made sense from that perspective to bring in Cody Fajardo. Made sense from his perspective. This was really the only opportunity that he had that he definitely would have been the guaranteed starter week one. So I think that was a good move for Cody Fajardo's career. Don't know how much the fit is going to work. We saw Cody Fajardo with Jason Moss, who was the offensive coordinator in Saskatchewan last year. He's now the Montreal Alouettes head coach. We'll see how that chemistry, it wasn't promising last year in Saskatchewan, but we'll see how it does in 2023 in Montreal. But I'll talk more about that fit as we get into season preview season later on in the coming months here. And then they also bring in two defensive backs from the Hamilton Tiger Cats in Jamal Roll and Ciante Evans. I think that these two additions could potentially make that defensive back room the strength of this team this year. You already have a very good Canadian defensive back there in Marc-Antoine Dequoy. You bring back Sutton and Beverett, I think, and you add those two key veterans here in Roll who can play the corner position. Evans can play corner as well, but he can also play a little bit of half as well. Versatile defensive back here. Evans actually comes back to Montreal, where he spent a couple of years back in 2019 and I believe 2021. A solid veteran player. Evans had a really strong season last year. Role I thought was a little inconsistent, but still has a good future ahead of him in the CFL. So I thought those were good additions for Montreal and some of their best work this offseason by GM Danny Machocha. They also bring in wide receiver Greg Ellingson from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now, Ellingson may be a little too long in the tooth for counting on to be your number one target in the CFL these days. I think that, he's still a very good receiver, but the health issues with him the last couple of years have just been a little bit sketchy. So I'm really interested to see how he does in Montreal, where he is going to be asked to play a very big role in this offense. So I'm very interested to see how Ellingson does next year. Guys like Reggie White and Ellingson are going to play a big role, like I said, in this receiving core. So I'm interested to see how Ellingson does. I have no doubt he'll put up production when he's on the field, but can he do that at that number one receiver level, and can he stay healthy for most of the 18 games next year? I'm really excited to see if he can do it. They also bring in linebacker Avery Williams from the Ottawa Red Blacks. Avery Williams has been a very productive player in this league, but, just more of a compiler, in my opinion, just been a part of a pretty bad defense in Ottawa the past couple of seasons. He's not a player, in my opinion, that really moves the needle one way or the other from the linebacking position. And, I think it's just a solid addition here, just not really one that's going to make a huge difference for this defense next year. They also bring in offensive lineman Justin Lawrence, who was named an East Division All-Star last year. I think this is a solid addition. This team needed some more Canadian depth on that offensive line, and I think he's going to slide in as one of their starters, have a pretty big role here in Montreal. He's not a guy that I think is one of the best offensive linemen in the league, especially on the interior, but I do think that he does have some solid potential and a pretty high floor at the CFL level. They also bring in wide receiver Jake Hardy, more of a depth Canadian receiver there that's going to contribute on special teams. They also bring in fullback James Tuck, who's a guy that's been around with Jason Moss and different other stops around the CFL, was with him in Edmonton, was there last year in Saskatchewan, I do believe, and, he's just a guy that can make a couple catches here or there, can carry the ball here or there for your offense, but mostly just going to be that solid team guy that can contribute on special teams. Just a solid Canadian to have on your roster. And then the final addition here is Louis-Philippe Barusa, who is a long snapper, and just don't really have too much to say about that. So they do bring in a decent amount of talent here, but we'll have to talk about the players that they lost this offseason now. Now talking about the players that they lost in free agency, starting with quarterback Trevor Harris, who moves on to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. This was really surprising to me. I really thought he was going to stay, but I don't know what happened there. Maybe it was just the ownership situation, the uncertainty there during the time that he was about to become a free agent that really made up his mind for him. But I think Trevor Harris was a very stabilizing force for this team the last couple of seasons, and he will be missed because I do think he has absolutely a higher floor at the CFL level on a game-to-game basis than Cody Fajardo does. And, I think that'll be interesting to watch next season if this team drastically regresses in a lot of cases under Fajardo. I think it's going to be interesting to monitor, and I think that Trevor in Saskatchewan could have some success. I think that it's going to be more difficult playing out west for him, but at the end of the day, I think from a Montreal perspective, this is a pretty sizable loss considering the leadership and production that he brought to the table last year for the team. They also lose wide receiver Eugene Lewis, who is arguably an even bigger loss. I think he is arguably the best receiver in the CFL today, played like it the last couple of seasons. Just such a big target, a safety valve, if you will, but can also make huge plays down the field, just can do it all at that wide receiver position, is that true number one, which this team now really lacks because, like I said, I have doubts about Ellingson and Reggie White's ability to play that number one role next season. So it might be more of a by committee thing now with Lewis out the door here. So very interested to see how the Alouettes adjust without Lewis next season, but obviously just a major loss and two of the biggest losses in all of the CFL that a team lost in free agency this offseason. They also lose wide receiver Jake Wieneke, to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He follows Trevor Harris. I thought he had a down season last year with Montreal, but at the end of the season, he started to piece it together a little bit. I think he's a decent candidate for a bounce-back season next year with Saskatchewan. So a talented player that led the league in touchdown receptions in 2021. I think he has still a pretty bright future in the CFL, so I'm very interested to see how he does in Saskatchewan. But again, those are two key wide receivers that they're going to be missing from this offense next season. Then they also lose strong side linebacker Darius Pickett, an ascending player for that defense, just a playmaking machine, just one of those guys that they really did a good job at, rotating guys in and being very exotic with their blitz packages last season. I thought that was a big strength of Montreal, especially when Noel Thorpe took over at defensive coordinator, and I'm very interested to see how Pickett adjusts to playing in Toronto next year. I think that is a big loss for this defense, and also they lose defensive back Mike Jones, who I thought had an excellent season last year at the corner position for Montreal. I thought he played his best football of his CFL career last year in Montreal, and then he signs with BC in free agency, so I'm very interested to see how that works out for this defense with bringing in guys like Deontay Evans and Jamal Roll to fill a role that was played by Mike Jones last season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. They also lose defensive lineman Thomas Costigan, who they brought in via a trade midway through last season. He only plays about half a year with Montreal before leaving here in free agency to Toronto, which hurts them a little bit. Costigan's not a superstar at this point of his CFL career or anything from that defensive line spot, but I like him because he has some versatility to play the outside and move inside to rush the passer. So I think he's an interesting player to watch in the CFL going forward, and it's just disappointing that they didn't really get too much out of that trade. They do still have Nafis Lyon, a corner that will probably still play a big role in this defense this year, but losing a big part of that trade they made with Edmonton last year, I think that could be a pretty sizable loss for them from a depth perspective. Then they also lose quarterback Dominic Davis, who is not going to be a big loss from a quarterback perspective. He was never going to step in and start for this team at a high level or anything like that, but he does provide very good efficiency in the quarterback sneak game, perhaps the best quarterback in the league at doing it. He goes to BC in free agency, so they'll have to find someone that is capable of playing that third and short role. It's kind of an underrated role in the CFL because some teams really take it for granted that they can get that 1 yard, but Davis, one of the best in the league statistically at converting that play. They also lose offensive tackle Chris Schluger to the BC Lions. I thought Schluger played pretty well for them last year. He's hung around the team the last several years, and I never really thought before last year he was much more than just a replacement level offensive lineman, but I think he's starting to grow into a starting level tackle in this league, and we'll have to see if that continues with BC. They also lose defensive lineman Michael Wakefield, who I thought was more of a rotational defensive lineman. Again, not a star guy, kind of like Costigan, not really a star guy, but does have some versatility. He goes to the Ottawa Redblacks in free agency, so again, to an East Division rival. So, I don't think it's a major loss for Montreal, but I think it's worth noting. And then the final guy here is wide receiver Hergy Mayala, who goes to the USFLs. I think it's New Orleans Breakers that he ended up with down there. And that was kind of surprising because he's a Canadian receiver that was given a good amount of opportunity in the CFL. So I'm excited to see how he does down south, if he carves a bigger role for himself. But I kind of doubt it because he did get a pretty sizable role in the CFL and just didn't take advantage of his opportunities all too often. So, they lose a lot of guys here in free agency, perhaps more than any other team. It's hard to look at this board here and say that this team is better than they were last season. They're just got to figure a lot of stuff out on the field. Excited to see if they can do it, but you guys will have to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. And with that said, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.